Have you ever, like, felt this weird thing where you're living out someone else's story?
What do you mean?
Like, you have these anxieties, fears, things you do over and over, and you just can't explain why.
Oh, I see. You're talking about those deep-seated patterns we can't quite put our finger on.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. Inherited family trauma.
Ah, fascinating topic.
We're going deep with Mark Woolen's book, It Didn't Start With You.
Or, as it's known in Spanish, este dolor no es mío.
We're going to unpack how stuff that happened generations ago can still mess with us now, even if we don't remember it.
It's amazing how Woolen brings together science and real-life stories to show how this works. And speaking of real life, his own story of how he got into this is pretty wild.
Yeah, didn't he have some crazy health scare?
He did. Woolen developed this vision problem, central serous retinopathy. Doctors were stumped.
And that fear of going blind, that's what sent him down this whole rabbit hole.
Right. Exactly. It's like inherited trauma became super real for him, showing how it can manifest in these really intense ways. It wasn't just theoretical anymore.
So it's not just like my great-grandmother's dislike of clowns that I've somehow inherited. There's more to it.
Way more to it. Woolen talks about this thing called epigenetics. It's basically how trauma can change the way our genes express themselves.
Epigenetics. That word always makes me think of like super complicated science stuff.
It is complex, but think of it like this. Imagine a light switch, right?
Okay.
The light bulb, that's your gene. Epigenetics is like flipping the switch, turning the gene on or off, and guess what?
What?
Trauma can flip that switch, and those changes, they can get passed down.
Hold on. So it's like our experiences can rewrite our genetic code.
You got it. And it gets even wilder. He talks about these studies on rats where they separated baby rats from their mothers.
Ah, poor little guys.
Right. So those rats, they grew up way more anxious. But here's the kicker.
There's more.
Their offspring, the babies of those rats, were more anxious too. And they'd never even been separated from their mothers.
No way. So the trauma literally got passed down through their genes.
It seems that way. And there's more. Woolen also talks about microRNA.
Micro what now?
MicroRNA. Think of them like tiny messengers that control your genes. Research suggests traumatic memories might be passed down through them too, like in sperm.
Wait, you mean actual memories? Like I could inherit a memory from my great-grandfather.
It's not that literal like flashbacks or anything. It's more like there was this study where mice were conditioned to be afraid of this certain smell.
Okay.
Their offspring, who had never even smelled it before, freaked out when they did. Turns out it was those epigenetic changes in their dad's sperm.
So are we saying I could inherit like a very specific fear because of something my ancestor experienced?
It's a possibility. Now, to be clear, most of this research is on animals.
Right. We're not giant rats.
Exactly. But there's growing evidence it might apply to humans, too.
So that fear of heights I've had since I was a kid, maybe it's not so random after all.
And that's what Woolen wants us to think about, those anxieties, fears, maybe even some health issues. They could be echoes of our family history. He talks about this guy, Jesse, who had terrible insomnia.
Insomnia.
Yeah.
Oof. I think a lot of people listening know that struggle.
Right. Jesse tried everything to fix it. Nothing worked. Then he started working with Woolen and described his insomnia with phrases like frozen and being left to die.
Frozen, left to die. That's intense.
Exactly. And those phrases, they were like clues. Woolen calls them core language.
Core language.
It's like a breadcrumb trail leading back to the source of the trauma.
Okay, now this is getting really interesting. So how did they figure out what those clues meant for Jesse?
So they dug into his family history. Turns out Jesse's uncle had died from hypothermia years ago.
Oh, wow.
And that's the thing with this core language. It can point directly to something buried in your family's past.
So Jesse's fear of, like, falling asleep and never waking up, that was connected to his uncle's experience, even though he didn't even remember it consciously.
Exactly. Like an echo down through the generations. And get this, Woolen says this isn't just some random thing that happens sometimes. He's identified 4 core issues that tend to be most affected by this inherited trauma stuff.
4 core issues. Lay 'em on me.
Okay, so number 1 is the flow of life. Basically feeling stuck, you can't seem to move forward. Maybe you sabotage yourself without even realizing it.
Ugh. Yeah, I know that feeling.
Right. Woolen gives an example of this guy, Gavin. He kept having these financial disasters. Over and over.
Damage.
Turns out his dad had the same problems. It was like Gavin was destined to repeat that pattern.
So it's like those hidden forces are shaping our lives, even when we don't know it.
Exactly. And it gets deeper. Issue number 2 is early interruption of the mother bond. This one can really mess with your sense of security, make it hard to trust people, especially in romantic relationships.
Oh, so that's why I have commitment issues. It's my ancestors' fault. Just kidding.
Well, not exactly your ancestors' fault, but it could be a factor. See, Wolin talks about this woman, Trisha. Her relationships were always falling apart.
Been there.
Turns out, when she was a baby, she was separated from her mom for a while, and those early feelings of abandonment, they were still playing out in her adult life.
Wow. So even if we don't consciously remember those early experiences, they can still have a huge impact.
Big time. All right, ready for core issue number 3.
Hit me.
This one's called Identifying with a Family Member Distinct from Parents.
Now, that one sounds like a mouthful. What does it even mean?
It means you might unconsciously take on the burdens of another family member, like an aunt, uncle, grandparent, whoever, even if you've never even met them.
Wait, what? You're saying I could be carrying the baggage of someone I've never even met? How is that even possible?
It's wild, right? But it happens. Wallen talks about this guy, Todd. He was super aggressive, always getting in fights, even though he hated it.
Sounds like a lot of inner turmoil.
It was. And when he started digging into his family history, he discovered his grandfather, who he'd never met, was known for his temper. He was a really angry, violent guy.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was like Todd was carrying his grandfather's anger.
Okay, now I'm really glad I don't have anger issues. That's some heavy stuff. What's the last one, number 4?
Okay, so the 4th core issue is early separation from the mother.
Wait, didn't I already talk about that with the mother-child bond thing?
We did, but this one's more specific. It's about the impact of being separated from your mom right after birth.
Oh, right. Like if your mom had postpartum depression or you had to be in the NICU or something.
Exactly. Even those early separations, before we're even forming conscious memories, can really stick with us. Woolen mentions this woman, Myrn. She had this deep fear of intimacy, always terrified of being abandoned.
Yeah.
Turns out she was premature and spent the first few weeks of her life in an incubator, away from her mom.
Wow. It's hard to believe something from so long ago can still have such a hold on us.
It's powerful stuff. But here's the thing. Wallen doesn't just leave us with all this information and say, tough luck.
Oh, good. Because I was starting to feel a little doomed there for a minute.
He gives us tools, ways to heal from this inherited trauma.
Okay, now you're talking. Before we get to the healing part, what was the most fascinating thing you learned from Wollen's book?
Honestly, the idea that we could be carrying around this hidden inheritance from our ancestors, it really blew my mind. It's like this whole other layer of ourselves, you know?
Totally. Like we're living out a story that started long before us. But before things get too heavy, you mentioned that Wollen offers some tools for healing, like visualization and reframing. Those sounded pretty interesting.
Yeah, they're really powerful. With visualization, Wollen says you basically create a safe space in your mind. Close your eyes. Imagine a room.
Gotcha. Any room, right.
Right, whatever feels right. And then, here's the cool part. Imagine that ancestor who went through the trauma, they're in the room with you.
So even if I don't know exactly what they look like or anything.
Exactly. Just let an image come to mind. And then, talk to them. Tell them you understand their pain. Offer them comfort.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting chills just thinking about it. Okay, what about this reframing thing? How do you even start to reframe something like inherited trauma?
Well, instead of seeing this trauma as like a curse or something, try to think of it as a form of love.
Hold on. Trauma as love. How does that even work?
Think about it. They went through those hardships so you wouldn't have to. They carried that weight, hoping that future generations, you could have a better life.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
It's like they took the hit for the team.
Exactly. And when we acknowledge that sacrifice, when we offer them compassion, we're helping to heal those old wounds.
Okay, I'm not going to lie. I'm a little choked up over here. That's really beautiful. But in addition to these, like, more emotional tools, what can people do practically if they're listening and they're like, oh my gosh, this is me. I think I have some inherited trauma. Where do they even begin?
Start with your core language. Pay attention to the words and phrases that really hit you in the feels, you know?
Right. But what if it's not as obvious as frozen or left to die?
It doesn't have to be that dramatic. It could be anything. Like someone scared of commitment might always say they feel suffocated in relationships.
Or I need to get out.
Right. Exactly. Or someone always panicking about money, even if they're doing okay. It's about tuning into the patterns.
Okay, so let's say you've identified some core language. How do you know if it's connected to your family history?
Start digging. Talk to your relatives. Ask about your family's past. Were there any big dramatic events?
Like wars or like huge family feuds?
Exactly. or patterns of illness, mental health struggles, anything that stands out.
So even if it doesn't seem related to how you feel now, it's worth looking into.
Totally. It's like putting together a puzzle. You got to find all the pieces, talk to your oldest relatives, look at old photo albums, read letters if you have any.
It's like being a detective in your own family. I love it.
Oh,
But before we wrap up, I just want to say to everyone listening, this isn't about blaming your family for the stuff you're dealing with.
absolutely not. It's about understanding,
Hmm.
about getting curious about those hidden influences so you can break free.
Exactly. Knowledge is power. And once you know what you're up against, you can start making different choices.
It's about taking control of your story.
Yes. And I think that's a great place to leave it. If any of this resonated with you today, definitely check out Mark Willen's book. It's called It Didn't Start With You. And hey, you never know. Exploring this stuff might not only change your life, but also the lives of your kids and grandkids. And on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep those minds curious, everybody.